There we go.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Denise, for facilitating and recording. My name is Erica Rose. Oh, there's already a chat from January. Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, my role in Library Land is library science faculty and program coordinator for the undergraduate library science program at the University of Nebraska-Omaha. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here with you all today to talk about communication in the workplace. And thank you for making time and space to be part of this conversation with me. As I mentioned, I'm a librarian who teaches. So as you might imagine, I spend a lot of time in front of people talking, hoping that folks will learn something. And so how I communicate is something I think about a lot because it's a big part of my job. But before I came to higher ed, I worked in libraries of all shapes and sizes and flavors. And whether I was driving a bookmobile or doing strategic planning or collection development, it occurs to me that it was kind of the same game at the end of the day. A lot of my time and energy was all about how do I package and deliver information in a way that is meaningful and relevant to my service community. I think that's what we do in libraries, no matter what our title is. And so I think that this idea of effective communication is something we actually have quite a foundation in place for. We already do it when we think about reference interviews and reader's advisory and program facilitation, and just our customer service across the desk for our patrons who come in the door. And so what I want to do today is really just take this idea of what you already know and live and breathe all the time, but think about it more broadly in how we communicate everything, whether that's our face-to-face communications, what we're writing, what we're digitally placing out into the world. It impacts so many things. And if you think about what your dream is for your library community, you know, what's something that you would love to see happen? Is it more harmonious relationships between your staff? Is it better support from your community? Perhaps it's more clarification of expectations in your library, or the ability to inspire. All of those things hinge on effective communication. So I think it's worthy of our time to really kind of dig into this conversation and think about this. Okay, so I see we do have 12 folks who are coming in, and I'm just going to bring up my chat here so I can keep an eye on things today. Oh, and there's some of you who are in groups. Wonderful. Would you mind just putting in the chat for me, you know, where you're from so I can kind of see where you all are and what you do? Hi, Michelle. And Tony Anderson's got quite a group. Wonderful. 2 from Holdridge. Excellent. Grand Island. Oh, hi, Laura. Jennifer from Arapahoe, Central Community College, Hastings campus. Deb at Maltman Memorial and Wood River. Cool. Just going to give it another minute or two in case any of you are typing furiously. Okay. Objectives. Oh, there's one more. Hi, Jenny. Thanks for coming today. I always think it's fair to let folks know there's a method to my madness and I have a plan. There's some comfort in that. Whether or not I stick to the plan, we'll see. But here are the objectives that I hope to achieve today. First of all, this idea of how important communication is and all that it impacts in our work. That's number 1. Number 2, there are differences in how we all communicate, and that has a huge impact on whether or not we can do this effectively. So we need to learn about those differences and think about them. Number 3, what strategies can we implement to be more effective in how we communicate? So it's nice to talk about the why and the need, but let's talk about the how as well. So that's what we're up to today. Now I'm going to make a big ask, and we'll see. I usually bat about 60% with this. If you are willing, I would love for you to turn on your camera, because I actually have an exercise that's going to be visual across the screen. So otherwise it's just going to be Denise and I playing, which is fine, but it's, it's not going to be as effective. Hi, Jenny. And there's Kozad coming in. Hello. We've got 4. Michelle's gonna do it. Awesome. Oh, Jenny Smith says you don't have one. That's okay. Don't have a camera on this computer. All right. So for those of you who do not have the ability to use your camera, then you can just put your answers in chat. So just say, well, I'll give you the keyword to say. So really what I want to do is get to know a little bit more about each one of you. And I want you to think about some of your own communication preferences. So the first question that I want to ask you here is, do you consider yourself an introvert? If so, you would touch your forehead. Or do you consider yourself an extrovert, which you would touch your chin? And there's always one in the audience who identifies as an ambivert and will touch their nose. Oh, I got 2 already. Okay, that's fine. Okay. And I actually probably am nose. Introverts. Let's see if we have any extroverts in the crowd. Oh, 1. Excellent. And remember that the definition of extrovert is really that being around other people energizes you, or if you need to be alone to be energized. You're reading Quiet right now. One of my top 5 books that I have read probably in the last 10 years. Quiet by Susan Cain. Absolutely, everybody should read it, I think. Ambivert, I think. Okay, great. Next question. If somebody is going to give you important news, do you prefer a direct presentation, or do you prefer sugarcoating, which would be here? So just tell it to me straight. Give me a little sugar with that. There's one more who likes a little sugar with it. Me too. Okay, great. All right, direct in the chat. Add some sugar, says McCook Public Library. Okay, let's think about feedback. Do you prefer written feedback or verbal feedback? If you are receiving feedback, written feedback or verbal feedback? Nice split here. Let's flip that. If you are giving feedback, do you prefer to say it or do you prefer to write it? Interesting. I do prefer to say it because I can add sugar in when I speak it. That's what I think. Okay, cool. Next, do you consider yourself a black and white thinker or more of a gray? Black and white, gray. I was just reading, I might need evidence. Yeah, I get it. A lot of black and white, few of us gray. Interesting that those of us who are on camera tend to be more gray. I wonder if there's something to that. Okay. And then do you like to read it or do you like to watch it if you are learning something? Read it, watch it. I want to watch it with subtitles. That's what I want. Okay, great. What you may have noticed, that concludes our game. Very nice job. You all are awarded 100 points and win. Yeah, that's fair, Laura. It depends on the thing. That's a very smart answer, actually, and aligns with research about learning preferences. So what you probably noticed if you were looking across the board is there were not any of us who said the same thing every single time. The formula for each one of us is a little bit different. And if you think about what that means, it means it's a very sophisticated process in determining what every single person that we interact with might need, which can be a little overwhelming when we think about communicating. But a lot of times we like to approach communication from what our preference is, but that isn't necessarily going to be the most effective way to deliver information that means something, that lands, that sticks, that helps people make a decision or form an opinion or that they can connect with. We have to think about what's on the other side of that communication. I'm going to share my screen now, and I'm going to warn you that I may, well, I'll probably just leave it on. I do believe in nonverbal communication, so I like to be eyeball to eyeball to people as much as I can. But a lot of what I am talking about today, there's a significant amount of content here, so it is nice to have it written out. We've already gone through our objectives. There, of course, are all of the questions that you just answered. Let's start off with this very basic definition. What is communication? I mean, I think that feels really simple, but there's a lot rolled in to communication. So this is a fairly academic definition: giving or receiving, exchanging ideas, information, signals, or messages. That's a lot of stuff, through all kinds of different ways: media, any kind of delivery vehicle. And it enables individuals or groups to persuade, to seek information, to give information, or to express emotions. There's just a couple of words that I wanted to highlight there, namely that it is an exchange. Communication is always an exchange. It is not the person delivering the message talking only. Whether or not the person on the other end of that communication actually gets the message remains to be seen, but it should always be an exchange. And I think once we kind of reframe our perspective of what a conversation should look like, that's helpful, because it's not just about us. It should be a two-way street. I think the word appropriate is very important here. You have choices in how you communicate. Denise and I were just talking about that. We now have this choice of, do we meet face-to-face in real time? Do we use technology to meet synchronously still, but allow for much more geographic disbursement? Or do we use a completely asynchronous option so that people can access things on their own terms, in their own time, in their own space? Or is it some kind of combination of all of them? There are certain kinds of communication that are better in one environment versus another. And so we have choices to make, and those choices are really important. And then the last word I think is really important is, we hope that our communication enables some kind of positive effect, whether that's information or emotional expression or persuasion or comfort or whatever. It should enable people to have that positive thing on the other side of it. Oop. Okay, disclaimer, I don't usually use resources from 1949 in my work and research, but I think it's worthy in this instance because it's still kind of the gold standard for what happens when we communicate. So this is Shannon and Weaver's model of communication. It came about in 1949, and it was built to sort of visualize what happens in telecommunications. So you have a sender, an encoder, this big thing called noise that we're going to talk about, a decoder, and a receiver. So even though this was built for telecommunications, what happened is social scientists said, this is actually pretty spot on for what happens in any kind of communication in a social setting as well. Let's go through those four elements and kind of break them down. So the first idea is the sender, and that's whoever originates the message. And I'm going to just create an example of this so that you can kind of see how this plays out. Let's pretend it's you. You are the sender. You have a message that you want to deliver. So the next step is you're going to choose your communication vehicle. So you may be writing an email, you may be talking, you might be making a phone call, you might be making a social media post. That is the encoding process. For our example, we're going to say that you are creating an email through your Gmail account. It's got to go someplace. So before it gets to the person on the other side, there's a decoding process that has to happen. It is the place that receives your signal. In our example, your email is going to Bob's Outlook account. All right, so that's the decoding process. And then, of course, Bob opens his email and he reads it, and the information exchange has taken place. But there's that big gray blob in the middle that we haven't talked about yet, which is noise. Noise is anything that interferes with our communication process. And the definition of noise is really, really big. Of course, in telecommunications, we think of noise as like static and you're breaking up and can you hear me? But when we think about it in the social setting, there are a lot of different ways that noise can interfere with communication. And I'm going to talk about some of those different things here in a minute. So for our example, let's just say that email never got to Bob because it ended up in spam. Or you know how it is when your email formatting doesn't work and all of a sudden it looked like a big blob of goo by the time Bob got it. Or maybe you were in a hurry and you typed in all caps. That spikes Bob's anxiety, and now he's already upset as he's reading your email, even though that was never your intent. Maybe you misspelled Bob's first name. That's tough. But sometimes it's harder than that, and you might misspell the first name. And as strange as that sounds, that's an automatic barrier, because they say, man, they couldn't even take time to spell my name right. It makes you feel a little bit slighted. Or perhaps you were in a hurry and you didn't bother to do any of those customary social niceties that make a message feel accessible to people. And when you think about it, noise can happen on our end. You were the one who misspelled the name, you did the caps, all those things. Noise can also happen on their end. Maybe it's his email that's not working, all of those things. So we have noise coming at us from two directions, which makes things really, really complicated. And ultimately, it creates barriers to access. We understand that. We're all about getting rid of barriers to access for people. When you think about all of the noise that we deal with, I just used an email as an example, but you can easily start thinking this through in terms of face-to-face exchanges, maybe across your service desk, maybe it's with your staff in one-on-one interactions or in meetings with your stakeholders, however you want to think about these things. There are 4 generally accepted types of noise that we can think about: physiological noise, physical noise, semantic noise, and psychological noise. Let's just kind of walk through those one by one. Physiological noise is anything caused by our own internal factors that affect how we feel and think. Are you hungry? Are you tired? Are you in pain? And remember that we are dealing with physiological noise. The person on the other end of your message likely also has their own physiological noise. It's interesting to me that we think about this really effectively when we are parenting. When we have a child who is upset or unable to listen or follow directions, some of the first questions that we ask are they hungry? Are they in pain? Are they uncomfortable? Do they need a nap? And it turns out that we adults are really just glorified toddlers, and all of those same things impact our ability to listen and communicate effectively. I mean, I think, the whole idea of whether or not you're hangry, we've all experienced hangry. It's its own word in the Urban Dictionary for a reason, is a great demonstration of physiological noise. Physical noise. So this is any interference in our environment that distracts us. Think about life in the library setting. There is so much physical noise that you have to deal with. There's a phone ringing, there's a baby crying, people are chatting, any kind of auditory sounds that kind of mess with your ability to focus. It can also be external barriers that we have in place. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, your service desk is actually a barrier, or the way that you choose to approach your meetings. If I'm having a meeting where I'm on one side of the desk and somebody else is on the opposite side of my desk, that is an intentional choice because I need that barrier in place. But if I'm having a meeting where I want to make sure that we've got a lot of back and forth open flow communication and there's high trust involved, I'm not going to sit across from somebody. I'm going to sit beside them, or we're going to sit around each other in a table where there's not any kind of hierarchical boundary or structure in place. In our public spaces, I mean, it can be everything from the fact that your lights are too bright, your air conditioning's too cold, there's bookshelves in the way, there's all kinds of physical noise that takes place. Then there's semantic noise, and this is actually tied to language and words itself. And think about that. We work with very diverse populations of people, whether those are age differences or ethnic differences or cultural differences or just personality differences, but there can be true language barriers. There's also linguistics barriers. I live with a tween and a teen, and half the words in their vocabulary I'm not quite sure of. So that's truly a barrier sometimes. And then we all have our own lingo, and every profession loves its lingo, and librarians are no different. And we love to talk about our databases and freedom to read and intellectual freedom and the Bill of Rights and the ALA Code of Ethics and, cataloging and tech services. And those terms mean absolutely nothing to the people on the other side of our service desk. And sometimes we even make assumptions about the acronyms or the topics that we're using with our own staff. So my department chair actually did this really fun thing, because we suffer from this too. Higher ed loves acronyms. And somebody finally said, I have no idea what half of the things that you said in some of our meetings are. So we played acronym bingo in our first department meeting of the year, which was a great way to learn about 50 organizations that I didn't even know existed. So it's just another piece of it to keep in mind. This one I think might be the most difficult. And again, it comes from both parties in any kind of communication exchange. We all have it. It is psychological noise. A lot of psychological noise can be demonstrated by our bias, and we all have unconscious bias. It can be from our past experiences. Maybe somebody had a really bad experience with a librarian when they were a child, and it has made them kind of grumpy and distrustful of librarians for the rest of their life. You don't know. Maybe somebody's going through a bad divorce. They've had a horrible day. Somebody just yelled at them, and then they've walked into your facility, and they are not reasonable. To you, it just seems like they're unstable, but for them, it was too much on top of an already bad day. So thinking about our own psychological noise is the best that we can do, right? That's the only part of it that we can control. But the empathy that we can have, knowing that everybody has their own psychological noise, is really important, particularly when we're dealing with people who we just don't know. We're in the public. I just wanted to bring up the point about social media when it comes to psychological noise, because I think that's a big part of, we're doing things differently now, and a lot more of our lives, whether that's personally or professionally, are happening on social media. And there is a lot of psychological noise attached to that. I'm not saying social media is bad. I think it has a lot of positive uses, but it does create this whole other bucket of psychological noise because social media is designed to create emotional reactions. That is 100% what it is intended to do. And so it kind of takes all of these things we've just talked about and it kind of ramps it up to its own level. We'll talk about that more in a bit. All of this can start to feel really overwhelming when you're thinking, well, I have no chance of ever being effective in communicating if I have to deal with all of that. But I want you to embrace this quote right here. I truly believe this. You are 50% of every interaction, every relationship, never more than that. So you are fully accountable for your part, but you are not to ever assume that you are more than 50% of that encounter. So I think that's an empowering thing to keep in mind as we approach all of this, because let's face it, I mean, we're going to do all of this stuff, we're going to know all of this stuff, and there's still going to be some interactions that just do not go well because the noise was too great. But we're only 50%, so control your part and know that you've done everything that you can. Okay, we are moving on to objective number 2. We've talked all about kind of why communication is really important and these differences in communication. So let's talk now about some of the opportunities that we have. How does communication impact our lives? You know, I'm going to just stop sharing here because I want to ask you some questions. If you would hop into the chat, just ballpark for me. How many emails do you think you received both personally and professionally yesterday? I actually did a count this morning and I got 150, 200, yep, 300. Okay. I mean, that's a lot. I don't see anybody saying 10. 152, very specific. Too many. Amen. Okay, how about social media nudges, whether that's Facebook or Instagram notifications or Twitter? Zero. Yeah, I mean, it depends if you're on social media for sure. Okay, let's add in phone calls. That number is going down. I think I had only maybe 4 phone calls, but I'm not working a service desk 30. That's a lot. Okay. All right. Now, how many people did you social media capital of the world, 0. How many people did you talk with face to face, including, your neighbors, people at work, family? Yep. Okay, a lot. Yeah, I know I'm asking you to do this accurate accounting when you can't possibly, but just to kind of remind ourselves of how much we are constantly communicating in one form or another. Even those emails that you ignored, you still had to make a decision about. Do I not read this? Do I delete this? Do I archive this? Do I have to come back later and do something with this? They all kind of take a little piece out of that reservoir that we have that allows us to communicate effectively. Okay. Bring up my screen again here. I think we've effectively determined that we all communicate all the time, sometimes to the point where it's exhausting. Here is what I think, though. Every interaction that we have either strengthens or weakens the quality of our interactions or our relationships or our service. I do not think that it is ever a point that doesn't move. We're either moving this way or we're moving this way, which means every interaction is an opportunity. So we get to decide what we want to do with those opportunities. I need to take a little bit of time here to talk about the fact that communication is a lot more than words. It feels obvious that word choices are important when we're communicating, but they're actually maybe not as important as you might think, which I can't believe I said because I love words, and it's one of my favorite things to think about, the right word choices. There are some different statistics out there in psychological research that talk about how much of communication is nonverbal. I've seen everything from 75% of communication is nonverbal to 90% of communication is nonverbal. I've never seen less than 75%. So whichever one of those numbers that you want to hang your hat on, I feel safe saying that the consensus is that nonverbal communication is by far the majority. So what's happening right now is, okay, like what I'm saying is important, but the way I'm saying it actually matters more to you than the specific word choices. So let's dig into that just a little bit. We have to talk about first impressions, and then we're going to go back and talk more about body language, but body language has a lot to do with first impressions. So humor me again. Ballpark guesses on how long you have to make a first impression. Five seconds, 1 second, 20 seconds. Five seconds. Okay. Whichever one of those numbers you choose, it's not long. I don't see anybody feeling like you've got a solid half hour to make that first impression. Let's take a look. CareerRealism.com, whoever they are, said that you have 30 seconds to make a first impression. I thought, okay, 30 seconds is pretty good because it gives you time to smile, say hi, kind of square your shoulders, maybe go in for the handshake, whatever you're going to do. 7 seconds from Forbes. Okay, that makes me sweat a little bit because 7 seconds is, it takes me 7 seconds to figure out, oh, okay, we're on here, we need to go. Psychologicalscience.com says you only have 1/10 of a second to make a first impression, which means the minute you see somebody, you have made a snap judgment. That theory comes from the idea of millions of years ago, we had to make very quick decisions about whether or not somebody was going to eat us, enemy or friend. So we are hardwired to do a very quick assessment of all of the physical factors in front of us and determine whether or not they're going to be friend or foe. Regardless of which of these numbers, again, it's not long. And that means that it has nothing to do with what's coming out of our mouths, although I'm sure we can ruin a first impression with, a poorly inserted comment. But it has a lot to do with whatever we see in front of us, the facial expression, the body language that person is demonstrating. That means for us, we really want to develop good relationships with our patrons. We want healthy relationships with our staff. We want healthy relationships with our mayor and our town council and all of these people. We have to get it right because you don't get another first impression. And just to add a little bit more weight to this, positive first impressions are so powerful. They lead to social cohesion. But a negative first impression creates a bias, creates social prejudice. And research suggests that they are so powerful, they're actually more important than fact. And while it's not impossible to undo a negative first impression, it is really tough. and energy that I would rather not have to allocate for that, if at all possible. I would rather just get it right the first time. Now, thinking again about the fact that we're saying a lot through nonverbal cues, 90% of information that is transmitted to our brain is visual. We are hardwired to see and make a lot of judgments about what we are seeing. I didn't like the word judgment. Come to conclusions about what we are seeing. Which is, it's one of the reasons that I do when I'm interacting with students and I need to have dialogue. I really want those cameras to be on, which a lot of people don't love, but I'm not going to give away this tool that I have where I learn a lot about people's learning styles, their preferences, their reaction to whatever I'm saying by what I'm seeing, even on camera, which two computer screens is its own noise. I worry about that probably more than is productive for me, but it's at least some way that I can see, right? And I mean, I can see it. You think I can't see this when I'm teaching? I can see this. I can see this. I can see this. I can see arms closed and closed off. I can see heads shaking, or I can see heads nodding. It's a lot of information just by being able to see folks. And I think we have to really think about this in the virtual space, because you may be having meetings with your staff now that are online. You may be offering programming that's virtual. We're going to do, I think this is going to continue to grow for us. Not that we are not going to have our face-to-face programs anymore, but again, we've got choices, which is great, but we have to be intentional with them. So for me, I think, whenever possible, try to use cameras if you're going to have communication interactions where we have, again, that engagement, that back and forth dialogue. Knowing that our brains are wired to be visual, how can we be productive in presenting information? Lots of research tells us that people respond to graphs and charts and infographics far more than blocks of text, which is hard for us, I've found, in the information profession, because we love the great American novel. We love reading, and I love it too, but in most, whether reading a novel is quite different from most of the other things that we're doing. So being intentional with whatever our end goal is. And I think word selection is really important. Words, in spite of the fact that most of our communication is nonverbal, words are very powerful. And the words that we choose can create an emotional response from folks. And so you want to be careful with that. And I think that's easier said than done when you just told me, I mean, you're having thousands of communication opportunities every day. And to sit down and take a minute to be intentional with word choice gets difficult. It can be emotionally exhausting, but I think it's really important. Whether we're thinking about first impressions, or you're thinking about sustained communication opportunities or more involved conversations, we have a lot that impacts that beyond the words that we use. So your expression, your body language, your demeanor, your mannerisms, for better or worse, what we're wearing, all of these things really do impact those first impressions. And beyond first impressions, they impact the way that your communication is received, because these things can create noise as well. So being intentional and kind of turning these things to your advantage is really important. And I think, again, that can sometimes, for those of us who are introverts, and I actually am more introverted than I am extroverted, that can be a lot. And also sometimes, I frown when I'm concentrating on something, but that's not necessarily going to be received as me concentrating. It's going to be me looking like I'm grumpy. So just kind of rethinking that, which, let me just tell you, when you teach and have to record your teaching sessions and look back, you realize how much you really do frown when you're concentrating on what somebody's saying. So that's been a good growth opportunity for me. Now, in addition to all of those things, the facial expression, our body language, whether or not we choose to fold our arms or keep ourselves more open, there's also the idea of space. And I think in public service, this is something that's really important. This came from communicationtheory.org, and it talks about the fact that there are distance levels that are appropriate in different kinds of interactions. So, I mean, particularly with children, they're a great example. They have no spatial boundaries and they think that everything is an intimate interaction, which is why they're on top of us all the time, right? But only with people who we really love and are comfortable with would we ever be less than 18 inches less than 18 inches from when we interact. Even 2 to 3 feet is still personal space. I mean, that's pretty close. If we're in a professional, more official setting, you want to keep that distance at 4 to 5 feet. That's still safe and still a certain level of comfort has to be there, but it's the appropriate amount of space. And then in public, we usually tend to keep more of like a 10-foot plus distance from folks when we're interacting. And I think even that can sometimes be a little formula to keep in the back of our head. Sometimes I think, why isn't this meeting going well? Well, I'm really far from, I was way up at the front and the tables just happen to be set up so that everybody's 20 feet from me. And that just feels like too much. I'm not honoring our professional relationship. Or, conversely, if you're talking to somebody and you're feeling like that's not a safe interaction, you may want that 10-foot plus space right there, and that's okay. People are communicating messages to us about their own preferences in where they choose to stand as well. And so we need to kind of acknowledge those and work with that. A lot of conversation about body language, and sometimes people are, maybe a little cynical about that. So I want to just share a clip. It's a TED Talk. It is one of the most watched TED Talks of all time. So if this is redundant, I apologize. But Amy Cuddy is one of those social scientists, and she's done a bunch of research on body language. This is worth the entire 21 minutes if you're ever interested, but I do want to play just a 30-second clip in which she discusses this. So bear with me 1 second here. Denise and I tested this and we think it works.
That this is a valid way to look at this. So social spent a lot of time looking at the effects of our body language or other people's body language on judgments. And we make sweeping judgments and inferences from body language. And those judgments can predict really meaningful life outcomes, like who we hire or promote, who we ask out on a date. For example, Nalini Ambady, a researcher at Tufts University, shows that when people watch 30-second soundless clips of real physician-patient interactions, their judgments of the physician's niceness predict whether or not that physician will be sued. So it doesn't have to do so much with whether or not that physician was incompetent, but do we like that person and how they interacted? Even more dramatic, Alex Todorov at Princeton has shown us that judgments of political candidates' faces in just 1 second predict 70% of US Senate and gubernatorial race outcomes. And even, let's go digital, emoticons used well in online negotiations can lead you to claim more value from that negotiation. If you use them poorly, bad idea, right? So when we think of nonverbals, we judge others, how they judge us, and what the outcomes are.
Okay. Couple of things that she says there that I think are worth just emphasizing a little bit. She talks about the idea of niceness and how we really determine whether or not people are sometimes good at their jobs, including doctors, based on whether or not we think that they're nice. I would like to trade out the word nice for kind. But I think there's a lot that we as public service professionals can take from that. And knowing that we want people to feel comfortable in our spaces, to feel that they can come to us and, ask their questions or whatever it is, the way that we use our body language to portray whether or not we are kind makes a big difference in whether or not people believe that we are good at what we do. So that's, again, something that I think that we can capitalize on. And it's something, when we're thinking about our first point of contact at the service desk and the people who are our front lines folks, they are your public relations staff. And our greatest marketing tool, and whether or not they come across as kind and approachable is going to have a tremendous impact on the way that your patrons view not just them, but your facility and your organization as a whole. So it's a big deal. Okay, heading back to this didn't look like it did before. Is that cut off for you now, Denise? Yeah, okay. I'm just gonna stop that for a second. Bear with me while I push a button and refresh. There we go. So now that we've, hammered home the idea of how important all of this is and everything, words and body language that's included, I want to talk about some of the things that I think make for really good communication and some things that we would maybe call communication sabotage. And I think this can be applied in either face-to-face interactions or virtual interactions. Julian Treasure created another amazing TED Talk that's worth a watch if you ever get the chance, that's all about really simplifying the idea of how to communicate well outside of body language. Some of the things that we do that will sabotage not just a single interaction, but an overall perception are things like gossip, which is something that I think every workplace struggles with. And really sadly, I've seen this do horrible damage in a lot of organizations. And it's tempting. But nipping that in the bud, I think, is one of the best things that we can do to ensure healthy relationships in our organizations, whether we're talking about staff or patrons or whoever it is. When people feel that there is a comment that is judging or that we are making excuses, that also undermines the communication. So if you're trying to have, if somebody has come to you with a criticism or something that is bothering them, and you respond with something that either feels judging to them or negates it by offering an excuse, that interaction is no longer productive. And those things seem obvious, but it's funny how our knee-jerk reaction is often defensiveness when it comes to communication interactions. And so those things just kind of come out. And we have to be, it takes a lot of sophisticated emotional energy to say, yep, I'm going to be open to this, and I'm going to listen to this, and I'm going to respond free from judgment and free from excuses. The other thing that is a quick way to sabotage communication is any kind of exaggeration or lying. Again, that seems obvious, but I think it happens more often than we might even know. We're quick to want to fix problems for people sometimes, so perhaps we promise something that's not possible. Or perhaps we just get into the habit of, your work is amazing and your work is amazing and everybody's work is amazing, and after everybody's work is amazing, it doesn't mean anything anymore. And so, or just quickly saying, yes, that's possible, when that's not possible, particularly when you're working with your staff or your patrons. If you can't deliver on what you've said is possible, that's going to create a lot of long-lasting damage. So we need to be careful in the promises that we make or what we agree to. Confusing facts and opinions is another thing that gets us into trouble sometimes. A lot of people like to offer their opinion as though it was fact. And it's great to have opinions. I think opinions are amazing, but it's important to state that they are our opinions. And I think this is, again, something where information professionals just sort of naturally shine because we love facts and we like to deal in facts. But that's really important, I think. It's always been important. It's extremely important now where we exist in a world that's a lot of sound bites, often delivered with an air of authority. Everybody gets to be the expert these days. And so I think this is an important thing to keep in mind. Oh, there's more. Disrespecting time, space, and preferences. So this is a big one for me. I think that time is one of our most precious resources, and a surefire way to alienate half of the people in the room who are very timely is to be late, to not have an agenda, or to waste people's time by not discussing what they thought that they were there to discuss. So making sure that you honor people's time and are efficient and effective with your words is important. Not being clear with expectations is something that I have found is very frustrating for a lot of people. I encounter it with students all the time who get frustrated very quickly when they don't know what they're supposed to do and have no idea of how they can then be successful in a class. When working with my staff, I find that that frustration is equally as prevalent if they don't understand what they need to do in order to, whether that's get promoted or feel like they've met the expectation for their job. I'm shocked at the amount of people that I encounter who actually don't have official job descriptions or ended up writing their own. And one, that's not effective. It's frustrating for them, but two, it's also really devaluing when nobody will take the time to clarify expectations for you, because that's an investment that we make in people. And when we don't make that investment, it's very apparent and people feel that. And then, of course, I added this last one in, which is when we forget those noise factors and we overlook that and we don't account for that. And, you know, sometimes I wonder if even when we are very, very frustrated with people, if we wouldn't be well served to first open the conversation with, how are you? I hope everything is okay. I can see that you are frustrated, you know, kind of giving that opportunity or taking that moment to just honor the fact that there is noise that you might not know about. And sometimes that will change. Often, I think that changes, you know, the whole tone, and it creates a safe space for them to be transparent if they need to be about the fact that, like, yeah, I'm having a bad day. Don't listen to anything I say for the next 5 minutes because I'm just having a moment, or whatever it is. These two things I'm going to lump together again. I put gossip again on purpose because I really think that this is a big deal. But this next one where I talk about complaining with proactive purpose is important to me. It's important enough. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can just talk to you about this. I've read a lot about this because I've been trying to figure out whether or not venting or complaining is actually something that's good, because everybody does it and we kind of are hardwired to do it because we're problem spotters, and there is value in that. You have to spot the problem in order to think about solutions. That's great. That's how we innovate. That's how we grow. That's how we evolve. But research has shown that complaining just to complain is 100% deleterious in its psychological impact, because if you have a frustrating encounter or if there's somebody that you don't like, every time we complain about them just to complain because we need to vent, that's something we like to say, I need to get this off my chest. All it does is it forces you to relive the anxiety that that encounter created and all the frustration that you felt, and it compounds every single time. So you're actually making it worse for yourself every time you choose to complain. Complaining with a purpose means that you are trying to problem solve. You're processing out loud in hopes of getting to a solution. What can I do to make this relationship better? What can I do to feel better about my situation? How can I fix this problem? That's completely different than just complaining. And I think being aware of that and modeling that for our peers, our colleagues, whoever that is, and perhaps even educating the people that we work with about that, would be really productive and powerful when it comes to creating healthier work cultures. So I talked a lot about sabotage, but I want to talk about kind of the formula for success then here, which is really easy. This is Julian Treasure gives us this model from his TED Talk. It's called the HAIL model, and it's really simple. It's to be honest, to be authentic, because we can spot that exaggeration and lying and that insincerity in a hot minute, to have integrity and live up to your word. And again, kindness. He uses the word love, however you want to look at it, but to wish people well. If we can be mindful of this formula in all of our interactions, whether that's the emails that we're creating, the conversations that we're having, or the way that we are putting ourselves on social media, I think we would be very well served. Again, I know that this gets complicated in this increasingly digital space that we live in. So what I would say is we have to seek the platforms that allow us to do as much of that as we possibly can. So how can I love Zoom because it allowed me to interact in real time with people so that I could be, I could include as much of that. I got to go back to it because I can't remember. Honesty and, no, I'm going the wrong way. Hang on. There it is. Honesty, authenticity, integrity, and love. Even on social media, when we're making Facebook posts or you're making Instagram posts or you're deciding how to market your services, I think this is something to be mindful of. It's also a way to be mindful of how you choose to react to other people when they maybe aren't following this model. Okay, the other aspect of it that I want to return to is the idea that we have to honor people's differences and preferences, and you have to give people space to be their authentic selves. I don't know why we don't just ask. After I did this presentation last year, I kind of had this light bulb moment where I said, why don't I just ask my students this at the beginning of every semester? And now I do. I say, how do you prefer to get feedback? Do you prefer one-on-one interactions or group interactions? So that I can set up one-on-one meetings with them if I need to. I say, what do you need to feel successful and supported in your learning environment? I ask all of these questions, and it's amazing because right off the bat, I am now set up to be more successful in how I communicate with them. So I think we should just ask. Wherever we can, we got to get rid of noise and barriers. Some of those we cannot control. A lot of those we can't, but the ones we can, they gotta go. Restructure how you set up your meetings. Rethink the tools that you use. Make sure that you're not calling for meetings at 1:30 when everybody's sleepy after lunch. Whatever those little things that you can do are, let's set everybody up to be successful. I think clear expectations are another really big piece of that. Give people clear expectations so they know how to be successful on the other side of those interactions. And reframing and kind of refocusing how we approach communication through that HAIL model is a nice thing to keep in mind, particularly when we have to talk with folks who feel difficult to us, which we have to do. It's part of the gig in library land. This last one, I think, this is something that I tell my students, this is a hireable skill. Spotting problems and pairing them with a solution is so important. It sets people apart. It doesn't have to be a viable solution. Just showing people that you are in the space where you want to be proactive and seek a solution changes everything. Active listening is all about building that rapport, learning the skills. You will become a better listener and actually hear what the other person is saying, not just what you think they are saying or what you want to hear. Noise is a huge part of that. And so I think everything that we've talked about today allows all of us to be better active listeners. So with all of that being said, I know I'm at my hour here, so I just kind of want to review those 3 things really quickly. Information professionals, communication impacts everything that we do, and everybody needs something different. And so I think librarians kind of have this superpower ability where we have to figure out what people need and what we can do to meet that need, including how we communicate with folks. So by activating our librarian superpowers, I think we can do this. And we have so many opportunities for it, whether that's across the service desk or with our staff or out in the community. So all of that being said, I love this conversation because it's a reminder to me to practice all of this that I preach, because it's definitely an ongoing journey and commitment. But if any of you have any questions, I'm happy to take those now. And Denise, I'll send you my slides because they have hyperlinks to all of the resources that I used, and you can send those to, post those or whatever you want to do, and that way people can access those things as well.
Oh, that'd be great, because I can actually, when I put it up on YouTube in the description box, I can post the slides, and then
Cool.
That works. Then everybody can hit those links, because I was making notes about which TED Talks I want to watch now.
Good. Yes, they're 2 really good ones. Yeah.
So
I just wanted to take a look at the chat. I don't see any questions. Any questions from the audience, or comments? Good. Thanks, Jenny.
I made notes all over my attendance sheet. So I think I can still see who all was here, because like I say, I was scribbling madly. Looks like thinking about the distinction between complaining and complaining with a purpose. That is a good, I hadn't thought about that as being a distinction. And that's what Laura says, is she's going to consider that, whether she's just complaining or complaining with a purpose.
Like I said, lifetime work in progress right here. So I get it. Agreed. Very useful with kids.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Things to think about. Yes. So thank you so much, Erica, for doing this for us here today. We appreciate it.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I think this is a really interesting conversation, so I'm always glad for the opportunity. And I really like spending time with librarians. So thank you, Denise.
Well, it was good to see you today.
You too. Thanks, everybody. I wish you all a happy fall.
Bye.